Well, from the counties, let's revisit some of the key stories that happened through this week. And one of the talking points that has been shaping conversations is the State of the Nation address by President Uhuru Kenyatta. And right now, we want to bring in our resident analyst, and that is Kenneth Gishinga, who is an economist and also the founder of Mentoria Consulting. Many thanks, Ken. And let's just unpack some of the key highlights of President Kenyatta's State of the Nation address. He covered quite a lot, from the handshake, trying to reach out to the opposition. And one of the big issues in his speech was on the Big Four agenda, talking very positively about how he looks forward to seeing the Big Four roar to life. But there's the cost element to this, Ken. Perhaps just kicking it off, what's your overall assessment of President Kenyatta's State of the Nation address?
You're absolutely right. I think it was one of the most anticipated addresses, especially given the fact that...
All right. Sorry. Well, Ken, just before you respond, there's an interesting development that is also one of the key issues we are following up. And of course, that is the swearing in of the deputy governor in Nyeri County, which is a story we have been covering for you. And today, the deputy governor has actually been sworn into office, and that is Caroline Karuge, who will be taking up the leadership mantle at the Nyeri County. And in relation to that, let's take you back to our conversation with Ken Gishinga. And Ken, sorry about the slight diversion. Right. We wanted to pick something, an update really, for our viewers. But just what was your assessment of President Kenyatta's State of the Nation address?
No, you're right. This was one of the most anticipated State of the addresses in recent memory. I think for a lot of people, given the handshake that took place on March 9th, a lot of people are very curious in how the political economy will play out with the Big Four. Because remember, we didn't get a lot of details around the handshake. Yes. But a lot of people knew that since this is the first State of the Nation in the 12th Parliament, there's an expectation that there'll be some allusion towards that. Given that, the president remained very focused on his Big Four, again, healthcare, food security, affordable housing, and manufacturing. And I think for a lot of people across the board, there was a sense of, yes, this is the way the country should go.
All right.
I think the fundamental reconciliatory tone seemed to be what the media picked up. But for me, I think it was issues around the financing, as you say, of these big projects, because we've had a very debt-driven economic growth. And I think some of the new thinking is, could we have sort of like a more domestic-driven strategy for the Big Four?
Interesting sentiments. Domestic-driven, debt-driven. Let's quickly listen in to the president as he addressed Parliament just 2 days ago on that.
All of us, irrespective of our political persuasion, are in broad agreement. Kenyans want to see lower costs of living. They want jobs for their sons and daughters. They want affordable food on their tables. And indeed, Kenyans want to see broad and inclusive prosperity. These goals, honorable members, are reasonable, and indeed some of them are constitutional requirements in their own right. None of us today in this august House will have forgotten that last year was an election year, or that our region was severely affected by drought. Despite this, honorable members, it is encouraging to note that despite these challenges, our economy remained resilient. Our real gross domestic product grew by some 4.9% in 2017, much higher than the 3.6% for world real GDP and 2.6% for sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, that's the president during the State of the Nation address. But to take you back to our conversation with Ken, the president is saying, despite the harsh economic environment, the economy remains resilient.
Correct.
At the same time, we're seeing companies have also been downsizing.
Correct.
We've also seen companies shifting their bases from Nairobi to Johannesburg to Egypt to Lagos. And in the midst of all this, taking you back to the Big Four and the viability of this, talk to us about what needs to happen now so that Kenya can sort of regain back momentum.
You're absolutely right. It's no secret that 2017 was one of the most challenging years. We saw the banking sector downsizing. We saw what happened with Nakumatt and Uchumi, the retail sector, got a major beating. That said, when the president was talking about the resilience, I think he was referring to the tourism industry, for example, which saw numbers actually improve despite a tough political year.
20%.
20% up. So I think what the picture is trying to paint is there is light at the end of the tunnel. If this country can be politically united, and that's what the handshake was all about, then really the future is very bright for this country because all the fundamentals point to a more prosperous macroeconomy.
Speaking about the macroeconomy, Ken, there is concern about corruption and the debt that the country is taking up. The president did touch on his willingness to fight corruption. He also talked about the issues around the debt situation the country is in. And we've also seen Treasury coming out saying that we should not be so much worried about our debt levels. Right now, our debt to GDP ratio is standing at about 51%, something the World Bank feels is we are sort of on the brink of entering a sense of default as a country. What's the way forward when it comes to debt management and stimulating economic growth?
Well, let me start with the corruption piece, because that's very, very important. I remember 3 years ago, at the same State of the Nation address, he read a whole list of people who had been involved or allegedly been involved in corrupt deals. And there was a standing ovation. Yet we didn't see, I mean, we saw people leaving office, but we didn't see any prosecution. I think that style of approach might not be the new type. I think the new thinking in fighting corruption right now is in digitizing services, because corruption thrives where there's an information asymmetry. So if you can digitize lands, the lands registries, if you can digitize higher education credentials, then it leaves no room for corruption. Now, moving on to the debt issue, I think the real thinking right now is, can we diversify our economy? Right now, Kenya has already been admitted to join the Africa Investment, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a Chinese-led initiative. And there seems to be a thinking that, yes, we've been too beholden to Chinese debt. Why don't we diversify? Why don't we refinance our expensive commercial debt? Because the commercial debt is really what weighs down this country. If we can get back to the development kind of pricing, then the country might move forward. But moving forward, we really have to think about the counties, because these are the counties are the ones that can generate income for the country. And the counties right now, from the devolution conference, these are the things that came up. How do counties raise their own revenue so that they don't have to depend so much on the national county? And a lot of game-changing ideas were brought forward. But we have to move towards self-sustainability as a country.
All right. And a lot to talk about, Ken, but we are out of time.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, very sobering analysis there on the State of the Nation address, just trying to unpack some of the issues that stood out for the analysts as well as for us here at KTN Business. Well, we want to go for a commercial break. On the other side of the break, we'll be taking you to the trading bell and a lot coming up ahead of the break.